Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to offer dana, then please do go to justthiszen.org/giving. Your support really does make a huge difference. Thank you so much.
I'm very surprised to report that I'm slightly sad it's the last day. My body is usually very keen for it to be the last day, but there's been something very containing about being in this place, about studying the Sandakai right next to the bay, something about that lived experience of the water and the streams flowing and being with this group of people has been deeply pleasurable in a hideous sort of way. So I'd really like to welcome everybody to today. These people, this place, this moment, and how the many parts that have flowed together to make this has happened. Several people have said to me they're really aware of how many people are holding different parts of this sort of amazing, moving thing that we are, and what gratitude they feel for everybody just doing their part and how their part makes this whole thing run. So there is something about that I think the Sandakai is also talking about, how each part has its place. So, and I've really loved hearing 3 different voices about the Sandakai, and we're all just here kind of pointing at the moon we see. So this talk is really my pointing at the moon I see, in the hope and trust that something happens for you to point at your own moon. That the talk isn't the truth, but it helps and supports people to point at the moon that they see. And I'd like to start with a short poem called To Know the Dark by Wendell Berry. To know the dark. To go in the dark with a light is to know the light. To know the dark, go dark, go without sight, and find that the dark too blooms and sings and is travelled by dark feet and dark wings. To go in the dark with the light is to know the light. To know the dark, go dark, go without sight, and find that the dark too blooms and sings and is travelled by dark feet and dark wings. I've been thinking a lot about how difficult we in the West might find it to approach the idea of the dark, because we have many overlays in our culture around, deep-seated racism and colonialism, and our Judeo-Christian heritage, which often characterizes things of the dark as being difficult, evil, shameful. And we often talk about, our hidden shadows in the dark. Darkness cloaks our shame. There's something about that sense of we can really come to the dark, this idea of the dark, with a difficult idea, and maybe our own secrets or our own shames that we would like to keep in the dark. So there's something about how do we move into a kind of different view, a different perception of dark. I was also thinking, now the dark web. There's a whole other world now, the dark web, and it's not a happy place. So it's not called the light and lovely web, that side, it's the dark web. So we persist in this idea in our culture of darkness equating and signifying something difficult, evil, shameful. But in the Sandakai, we're really being offered a very different view, a really different perspective on the encompassing nature of the dark. It's not the bleak night of the soul where things go to shrivel and die. It's the actual place where everything exists in its particularity, where everything is equal in its distinctness. It's the place that we often call in our practice emptiness, but it contains everything. And it's not an absence of light, but the presence of source. When we can let go of some of those distinctions that we see in the light, what do we meet in the dark? And the Sandakai, as Lynn invited us so beautifully yesterday, was, we start close in. We start close in with a different perspective. And so many things are nurtured in the dark, babies, seeds, bulbs, dreams. And we nurture our practice in the dark and in silence. And Joan Sutherland, who some of us listen to every Christmas with her beautiful talk, The Radiance. I can't remember the next bit, but it's a lovely 12-minute talk. And in it, she talks about darkness, but she quotes a percentage, which I think is really surprising to us, as Josh talked about our overlit world. She quotes the percentage that 96% of the universe is dark, and only 4% is light. 96% of the universe is dark and 4% is light. What happens in your body if you think probably 96% of me is dark and only 4% of me is light? What happens when we start aligning ourselves with the natural darkness that we actually live in? I was reading an article by a writer called Will Rees in The Guardian, and he was wrestling with really complex health issues. And he said, as the critic Stephen Connor has noted, revelation is always haunted by a feeling of not knowing. Do you know that feeling? Like you find out something you didn't know, and all it exposes is the shitload of stuff you still don't know? He says, as previously unexpected areas of complexity are revealed, thoughts and suspicions loom about what else remains to be brought to light. Where previously there had been nothing at all, now there are depths waiting to be plumbed. When we take out what's in the light, we discover an infinite number of things to be found. The vast complexity of life. And this has felt really true for me. Many of you know I have and had a deep addiction to knowing. I'm the person who's going to Google, I'll see an actor and I'll Google their CV, like what they're doing at the moment. It's like a really, really deep addiction to knowing, which came from a desire for safety. It came from a belief that if I could know enough, I would be safe. Clearly that's not true. But as that's really loosened over time and through practice and just realizing the ridiculousness of it, I've moved into a kind of much more a mixture of both terror and liberation. Terror that I know so incredibly little. And liberation is knowing that I can't know. I can't know. And that is really liberating. And there are some things I do know. I'm lucky, I know where the toilets are here. And I probably know how to get home today. There are things we know, but if we hold them as permanent knowings, or our capacity to permanently know them, because that too shifts, what can it be like to really lean into not knowing? There's a Hakomi exercise that some of you here will know called Don't Know Mind. And it's a really lovely practice where people sit in pairs, and the invitation is that one person is asked a series of questions to which you know an automatic answer. And the invitation is to let the automatic answer arise in you and then just be really quiet and see if you can get to a place where you don't know. So the questions might be, where were you born? How old are you? Do you have children? In Zen we might say, what was your original face? Who were you before you were born? And what happens if we don't try and answer that, but let an answer arrive? Not with our knowing mind, but with our much greater wisdom that we have. And recently I was talking to someone who has a strong tendency to lean into nihilism. And they understand they have a strong tendency, but it's a really powerful tendency. And the situation in the world at the moment is provoking that tendency quite strongly. And we were talking on Zoom, and it was a beautiful, really beautiful autumn day, and the sun was illuminating the yellowing leaves that were still left on the tree outside, and I could hear the murmur of the traffic and the people below, walking, really unaware of this tremulous conversation we were having upstairs. And then, really surprisingly, on this late autumn day, a butterfly just emerged into the light from behind the tree that's directly outside my room. And for a moment, it looked like one of the seed pods that was sort of falling and littering the ground. But then it rose, and I was really just caught in this moment of this butterfly appearing in this difficult conversation about meaninglessness. And it was a moment to be awake to be fully and truly awake to. And then I asked my fellow conversationalist whether their nihilism might mean that they couldn't imagine a world bigger or more mysterious than their own limited views. Can you imagine that the world is so much more than you can see? And we could both feel this really deep sense of how that view of the world, that it's all pointless and meaningless and going to hell in a handbasket, was just a shutting of door after door after door. And the question rises for me when I read the Sandakais, what is it that flows on in the darkness? What is it that flows on that we can't see, may never see, but flows on? Suzuki Roshi said, we get no letters from the world of emptiness, but when you see the plant flower, when you hear the sound of bamboo hit the small stone, when you see a butterfly fluttering in the late autumn, that's a letter from the world of emptiness. A little postcard reminding you of a world that's so much more than we can ever know. Joan Sutherland talks really beautifully about this embracing of everything and the softening of our grip on our pre-decided maps of the world. And in the Vimalakirti Sutra, which some of you we did a retreat on the Vimalakirti Sutra, and some of you may have read it. It's short but punchy. It's wonderful, and it involves celestial beings, fabulous. And in her comments, she quotes Vimalakirti's first question to Manjushri. So Vimalakirti was a bodhisattva who was lying in his sick room, 10 by 10 sick room, and the Buddha kind of knew that Vimalakirti was sick, because why not? So he asks the assembled 32,000 beings, will someone go and check how Vimalakirti is? And they're all terrified of him. They're not terrified of the Buddha, they're terrified of Vimalakirti. And they won't go and see him because they know he'll just trip them up. So in the end, Manjushri says, oh, okay, I'll go. So Manjushri and 32,000 beings, including monks, nuns, lay people, gods, bodhisattvas, heavenly musicians, dragons, phoenixes, and snake princesses, were going to go to his sick room where he was lying, and he knew they were coming. So he ordered his servants to remove every single thing in his house. Every seat, every object, every artifact, every other thing in the house, so that only his sick room, his bed, which he was lying in, were left. And so Manjushri and the 32,000 beings arrive. And I love this. So instead of saying, how on earth are 32,000 people going to be here, he actually says, Manjushri says, but sir, the room is completely empty. There are no chairs for anyone to sit on. That's the problem, apparently. And Vimalakirti responds, let me ask you, did you come for the way, or are you looking for a place to sit? And that's a great question for us to ask ourselves. Did we come for the way, or are we looking for a place to sit? Are we looking for something that's comfortable, our own place, the certainty that we will have a seat, a place only in the light? Is that what we're looking for? A place to sit? Or have we come for the way? Joan Sutherland says, if the way is something other than the teachings about the way, you can let fall away all the things you think the way is, or want it to be, or have been told to expect it is. You accept the condition of seatlessness and stand on bare ground. And that's what the Sandakai is inviting us to do, to accept the condition of seatlessness and stand on bare ground. And she says, when you do that, what walks towards you? When you do that, what walks towards you? I love that question. What an amazing question. You know, my searching mind, I used to go for walks and look for magical things, you know, twisted roots or particularly wonderful leaves, or it was like I was looking and I didn't let the walk come to me. You know, there's such a difference in that looking and allowing the world to come to you. So what do we find? What walks towards us when we sit in our seatless place? She goes on to say, that's the way that mystery cannot be expressed or explained or anticipated until the moment it appears. Until the moment it appears, it's unimaginable to you. Jan said yesterday in her talk, you know, I can worry about this in the future, but this one in the future isn't going to be me. You know, what if we can think, actually, I have no idea, because I don't know who's going to meet this. I know who's here, but I don't know who's going to be there in that future. The way is a willingness to seek that and nothing short of that. And many of us here will have been appreciating the amazing views across the estuary here, noticing the channels that open. Have you noticed that? Like suddenly there are all these amazing shimmering channels as the water recedes. And then the tide returns and it's one flat, glistening, shimmering surface. And the bay is deadly. It's beautiful and it's deadly. The channels shift and change and the very ground quakes and turns to liquid here below your feet and trapping you and suffocating you. People have died walking across the bay. People have died dog walking. People have died fishing. It is a deadly place. And there's a designated, he's called the sand pilot. He gets given permission by the Queen to be called, or the King now I guess, to be called the sand pilot. And his task, because sometimes we do great big long walks across the bay to raise money, and maybe 500 people will go across. And he goes out onto the sands and he plots a safe course across the two rivers that run across the sands perpetually, different kind of depths, and he sticks big laurel branches, it's traditional, you stick laurel branches into the sand to mark the passage that's going to be safe. But he has to go the next morning to check it's still safe. And our practice is a bit like we have these laurel branches that have been left to us, the Sandakai, the Heart Sutra, all the teachings are like laurel branches in the sand, but they only work if we know we have to keep checking them moment by moment in this life, in our life. Where is our foot right now? Whereabouts on the sand right now is our foot? And we can't trust someone else's way. That's why we point at the moon. It's like, the way I do it is not the way you're going to do it. The way Flint has done it is not the way I've done it. And I've learned from that too. Yesterday's marker may not keep you safe. It really might not. The things that resourced you yesterday under those circumstances may not be the ones you need right today. You have to keep taking the shifting sand moment by moment to see what prevents disaster. And then sometimes, of course, the land we thought was steady opens up in front of us. I can imagine every single person in this room thought they were stood on something solid and the ground moved. Every single one of us knows that feeling. And in our practice, of course, we lean into care for each other. And if our foot is starting to disappear, ask for help. And interestingly, with the quicksand, the advice is lie down. The more you struggle, the more you try to pull your feet out, the more the suction happens and the more you will be trapped. Isn't that counterintuitive? Can't you imagine? It's like, my foot is, the tide is coming in, I'm completely stuck. I'm just going to lie down and wait for help. Wait for help. Wait to know what needs to happen next. Ask for help. Our amazing Coast Guards here get called out time and time again to save people and dogs and occasionally cars. We're crazy. Joan Sutherland says, in our yearning for enlightenment, we might hope that it's a state of unfluctuating perfection that solves the problem of constant change that rules our lives. But if we see what we're doing as awakening, something that unfolds over a lifetime, we understand that each of us is somewhere in the middle of a long walk through varied terrain. If you ever join in with one of the amazing, I know some of us here have done it, the amazing walks that happen across the bay, we start as this incredibly huddled group, like maybe 200, 300, 400 people. And by the time 10 minutes, half an hour has passed, it's completely strung out across the bay. It's like in moments, it just changes. And we're all on that long walk over difficult terrain. And our task is to stay alive to the changes in that terrain and to trust the path as it appears before us. What if you trusted the path as it appeared before you, rather than saying, that's not where the map says to go? That's not what was meant to happen. When I took this step, this was meant to happen. And look, this happened. And she uses these images, the underground streams that flow far below the earth, to let our psyche sink down into that underground stream that's cool and clear, and offer it to the world, where the world's on fire and our psyches are on fire. And she has really developed, some of you will have heard her talk about endarkenment. And she describes endarkenment. This sounds so beautiful to me. To lie back, like lying back on the sand, to relax onto the fathomless mystery and to be comfortable there. To come to rely on that there is nothing to rely on. And also rely on the beauty and the love of that mystery. That in some ways we can become devoted to the mystery. And another way that endarkenment expresses itself in our lives is our willingness to get our hearts broken. Walking across this difficult terrain doesn't mean your heart will stay unbroken. She says it's our willingness to get our hearts broken. And this is a world that will break your heart, she says. And if your heart isn't broken, you're not paying attention. If your heart isn't broken by our world, our individual worlds and our wider world, you're not paying attention. It's a willingness to have our hearts broken and stay broken that is the understanding that the broken heart is open and the broken heart is connected. Our broken heart is connected so that we press our own individual broken hearts up against the great broken heart of the world. We press our own individual broken hearts up against the great broken heart of the world. And then we ask, what's next? What's next? I've often heard Flint say, now this, now this. We come to feel that both enlightenment and endarkenment need each other, and all is illuminated by and in the dark. And in the Sandakai, we say light and dark oppose one another, like the front and back foot in walking. We need both of those. Carl Jung said, how can I be substantial if I do not cast a shadow? I must have a dark side if I am to be whole. He also said, one does not, I had this on a postcard in my room for 20 years or so. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And then I would add the impossibility of making all the darkness conscious. So how do we get the courage to venture out into this vast unmarked territory? And Suzuki Roshi says, in the light there is darkness, but don't take it as darkness. In the dark there is light, but don't see it as light. And his chapter on this in the book Branching Streams is so helpful, because he says, in the light there's darkness is a literal translation of the Chinese, which I won't attempt to pronounce. One particular word, ari, which is at the end. There is. But the literal translation doesn't make sense, because there are two ways of saying there is in Japanese. One is pointing towards, there is something, there's a greenhouse in the garden. And for that you would use the character zai. When you're saying I have two hands, because it would be phrased as there are two hands, we use ari. This is there are, not there are over there, but there are integral to the whole being. That's what this there is means. In the light there is darkness. Like in this body there are hands. it's not separate. My hands don't go wandering off. They're not distinct from me. I am my hands are me. There is, in the light, there is darkness. And in the dark, there is light. And part of the character for Ari means flesh or skin. You know, it's like this relationship that you can't pick apart. You can't separate flesh and skin from body, or if you do, something dies. You know, it's like these live totally together. And light and dark are also really, depends on your point of view. I'm looking at a really bright screen because that's what my computer is doing for me. You're sitting in increasing darkness. So what are we in right now? Am I in lightness? Am I in darkness? I can see really clearly, but I can see the light is fading here. And all of that is here right now. Suzuki Roshi goes on to say we shouldn't cling to the idea of darkness and light. We shouldn't cling to the idea of equality and differentiation. It's our soft, flexible minds finding freedom in not always so. Not always so. Because dark and light are constantly shifting. One time many years ago, Josh and the children and myself went canoeing, the only time we did it, in the Ardèche in France. It was sold as a holiday trip. Some of you may have done such things. And Josh and Eleanor were in one canoe, and Ben and myself were in another. And initially it was quite easy. They just put you in the canoe and said, off you go. And it was very lovely to begin with. It was going down and the beautiful surroundings and the river, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. And then we came to a sort of natural sort of obstacle where there was some big rocks, and the water poured over the rocks in a kind of natural weir. And Ben and I, who were first, managed to negotiate this, but Josh and Eleanor didn't. And they got caught in this tumbling water that went round and round, and they couldn't get out for a while. And it was actually a deeply terrifying experience. Never canoe again. They got out, fortunately, survived. But I thought that image of how we can get caught in our practice, caught in our thoughts, caught in the tangles in our life. You know, it's like, how do we find our way out of those places where we're really tumbling, we're really caught? And we find ourselves churning and churning and churning. And I'm sure for some of you sitting here, this 4 days has been churning. Some of you will have slipped out of the weir and found a way forward, and some of you maybe never even got in the canoe. It's dangerous territory. How do we come back? And we come back to not to and not always so. And to recognize that the bay and the way will always, always resist, subvert, be unexpected. Will always resist, subvert, and be unexpected. The way is the only thing right in front of your foot. When Flint said to Josh, be aware of how you place your feet in the sender. And Jan remember, at this moment, think about how you're placing your feet. Each moment. What's the ground under me right now? We might say, as Suzuki Roshi did, when you are Buddha, when you are you, Buddha is Buddha. When you are fully you, with your feet on the treacherous ground, Buddha is Buddha. And we might know those moments when we're being a full expression of ourselves, with nothing missing and nothing extra, and we're nothing special. There's a poem I'd like to read at the end, which is called Love. Love means learn to look at yourself the way one looks at distant things. For you are only one thing among many, and whoever sees that way heals his heart without knowing it from various ills. A bird and a tree say to him, "Friend." Then he wants to use himself and things so that they stand in the glow of ripeness. It doesn't matter whether he knows what he serves. Who serves best doesn't always understand. Love means to learn to look at yourself the way one looks at distant things. For you are only one thing among many, and whoever sees that way heals his heart without knowing it from various ills. A bird and a tree say to him, "Friend." Then he wants to use himself and things so that they stand in the glow of ripeness. It doesn't matter whether he knows what he serves. Who serves best doesn't always understand. A beautiful Czech poet, Czesław Milosz. Thank you all for your beautiful presence here.